So I can't believe what they've done in 2 years with John Dorsey there.
Well,
I'm sorry, this year with John Dorsey. I'm sorry.
Well, that brings me to this question, Joe, because
Yep.
I was listening to the PFG Vibe podcast the other day, and Tom Paulin had mentioned that William Perry was a big sensation because he was a 300-pounder back in the day, but nowadays
Right.
that's like kind of an average size. So, you being a guy that really likes the 70s, how really big of a difference is it in the player size and everything from back in the 70s and 80s and such that you can kind of notice? And
Well,
how does defense play differently too?
it's hard to really ignore. Defensive linemen back in the 70s, especially prior to like the mid 70s, take Alan Page, the great defensive lineman, defensive tackle for the Minnesota Vikings. His playing weight was 245 pounds as a defensive tackle. So he had to be quick. In the 70s, you did not have a whole lot of 300-pound linemen. As strange as that is today you have to have that. Back at that time, you didn't. They relied a lot more on speed, but the speed rushers, the outside defensive ends and stuff. Back at that time, they had weapons like the head slap that they could use, and offensive linemen prior to 1978. They weren't allowed to extend their arms when they're pass blocking or run blocking. So the offensive linemen back then, they really had to be quick. They had to have great footwork, and it's changed so much over the years because of the rules. They're getting bigger and stronger and faster. These players are. They're eating a lot of nutritious stuff, and they're just doing a lot more weight training than they've done in the past in the 70s. I remember reading somewhere where somebody said that if Jack Lambert, the great middle linebacker for the Pittsburgh Steelers, if he was playing in today's league, in the NFL today, I forget who said this, but he said that Lambert would probably be a backup strong safety. And I'm thinking, holy cow, that's quite a downgrade from him being an all-pro middle linebacker. But he was so thin. The speed of the game is faster today than it was back then. But the individual players back then had to be so quick off the line of scrimmage. To this day, I think they're a guy like Deacon Jones, the Rams, and later the Chargers, and Mark Gastineau, the New York Jets. I thought they were the two fastest defensive ends off of the snap of the ball that I had ever seen. As the years go by now, I don't know if they would have been able to be as fast as some of the great defensive ends in today's game. But you've got teams that just hire these defensive ends for one purpose only, and that's the pass rush. And they do it really well today. They have to. They have to be able to.
Would you put Dave Robinson in that class with Deacon Jones and Gastineau as quick off the line, or was he more powered?
Well, Dave Robinson was an outside linebacker, but he was one of the bigger ones. I don't know if Lombardi had a lot of players in his era blitzing, because they were getting such a good pass rush from guys like Willie Davis and Ron Kostelnik, and those guys. They had a pretty good pass rush with just their front four. But Dave Robinson was a great outside linebacker. I think he could play in today's era. I don't know how well, because it's hard to compare. These guys today, they're just so much bigger and faster and stronger. But the guys back then, they had a lot of heart, and they didn't have a whole lot of rules that pertain to their individual positions. You take quarterback, the 72 Packers had Scott Hunter and Jerry Taggy. They really had to get rid of the ball quickly, because the linemen rushing them, they were just really fast. And the shotgun offense wasn't resurrected until 1975. So in the 72 Packers, or any team in 72, you didn't see a shotgun offense. So you had, your basic 3-step or 7-step drop back by quarterback and throw. And you rarely got a chance to get into your third read to see a receiver opening. The Packers, they made no mistake about it in 72. They were a running team. And with MacArthur Lane and John Brockington, it would be foolish not to run the ball. And what's really incredible about that team was that almost every defensive team out there that played them knew they were going to run the ball. And they still couldn't stop them. They almost together rushed for almost 2,000 yards. They were the best running team tandem in the NFC, to be eclipsed only by the Miami Dolphins, Larry Zonka, and Mercury Morris.
Yep.
Okay, well, here...
I say 72 was a special year for the Dolphins, if I remember correctly.
It was.
Well, here's something that crossed my mind, Joe, real quick. It goes back to something you just said, and it intrigued me. You mentioned the players of the past heart, and wouldn't it be cool to see a guy like Deacon Jones and all that with the meanness, the drive, and the heart they had? Because I truly believe you put any of those guys with the way they grew up and their mental state of how they were and their toughness from back then, and all they have today is just supplements and more knowledge. So any guy that you would put from the late era into the modern era, you have to use the caveat that they're going to have those same opportunities afforded to them, but yet they have a different mentality that they came from. That could be a very scary combination of a player there. It's just something that popped in my head.
Definitely. You had to have really wanted to be a pro football player back at that time. A lot of dreams get crushed every year in training camp. And what do you do after that if you don't make a team? And eventually, some go to Canada and some whatever. But back at that time, it took a lot of heart to play the game. It was. It was still a violent game. It's still a violent game today, but you didn't have a whole lot of protection. I mean, the helmets were not as state-of-the-art as they are today. Of course, knee injuries, they're still going to occur. It wasn't until the late part of the 1970s when quarterbacks had a flak jacket to wear. So it was, you really had to want it bad. And what's really amazing is the fact that they didn't make a lot of money. Like we consider today, the league minimum is what, like $300,000 a year? Well, vested veterans, I believe, is $750,000. I believe the rookie now is $450,000 or $550,000. That's incredible because, in the mid '70s, right after Bart Starr took over as head coach of the Packers, I looked over some old Packer programs from that era, and Bart would take out a full-page ad in the programs asking Green Bay businesses to consider hiring some of his players during the off season in their businesses in order to. He wanted to see if they could stay in town to keep, practicing and doing weight training in Green Bay. I don't know how successful he was, but that just goes to show that most every one of these players, with the exception of your notable superstars, they had to work a second job in order to make ends meet. And, of course, if you go far into the playoffs, you get a lot of extra money. The team that wins the Super Bowl makes, I think, they would make around $30,000 if they went all the way into a Super Bowl. That's much more than that now, but back in the mid-'70s, an extra $30,000 for some players, that could have been more than they were making on salary. So it took a lot of heart for guys to play in the '70s. And sadly, unfortunately, with the way things are medically, a lot of these guys, their faculties aren't as good as when they were young. Naturally, getting older affects everybody sooner or later. But you get your head hit enough, it's going to affect you. I remember Reggie Harrison, who played for the Steelers. and he blocked a punt in Super Bowl X that turned the game around and gave the Steelers the victory. He to this day he doesn't even remember that. He can't. The greatest play of his entire NFL career, he can't remember it because of so many concussions that he had over the years. That's sad, but that's the state of the situation now in the NFL. A lot of the older players are not as healthy physically. I guess you could draw a correlation for some of them to the amount of hits that they got on their helmets. Helmets are great today. They're state of the art.
The equipment is much better. Well, we have about 4 minutes left, Joe. So what I want from you is, what is your reason or your favorite thing that made you want to dive into so many different topics in the 70s?
Oh, wow. That's a tough question because it was – I just love the fact that the game at that time was not oversaturated. You know, you had your baseball season and then your football season, then your basketball. You didn't have 24 hours a day coverage of the NFL in March, April, May like you do now with the NFL Network. And they're, the combine and the draft, it's all televised. Back in the 70s, it wasn't. But I just remember the decade of the 70s as being it was so much fun to watch back at that time. The strategy, it was, you could follow the strategy along and stuff. Today, it's so much more, how would you say, chess-like. There are so many more obstacles toward anything that the players are trying to do because it's so confusing. Even to, the fans, you could have a PhD and still be confused by all these different sets and man in motion and all kinds of different things that they're doing. It was just a great decade, and I enjoyed watching it as a kid. And I thought, no one's really. Some people have written about it in bits and pieces, and a few people have written books about it, but nobody wrote a really comprehensive year-by-year book about the 70s in the NFL. So that was my plan. That's what I tried to do. Most people liked the first book, on the 70s. I sent a copy to the president of the Hall of Fame, Mr. Baker, and he sent me back a card saying, I really enjoyed this book, but I can't wait till you write another one on the 80s and the 90s. And I just chuckled because it took me 6 years to write that one. I wasn't going to write about the 80s and the 90s. I just didn't have enough expertise in those arenas. But I just love the 70s. And the NFL Films Company, the 70s that was their, I think, one of the highlights of all pro football. We're watching the NFL Films programs in the 70s. It brought a lot of people into watching pro football, and including myself.
All right, we are at the 2-minute warning, Joe. So we want to thank you very much for joining the show. And honestly,
yes,
I would like to
I learned so much just by sitting here listening.
Right, I would love for you to come back and get you on for a longer session, since we kind of cut you short by screwing up our first part of the segment. I could literally listen to you for days talk about the history of the game, because it's all stuff that you've just taught me. You
guys are gonna make me want to get a bigger hat size now.
I'm not.
We'll send you a 10-gallon hat, a cowboy hat, so you can fill it all you want.
Thanks so much again for coming. The stories you have are absolutely incredible, and I could listen to you for hours, man.
Well, thanks.
I hope everybody reads your books, because I think they would definitely.
I'm buying a copy when it comes out.
Well, if you mail it to me, I'll autograph it for you and I'll mail it back to you.
Oh, that would be awesome. That would be awesome.
No problem.
We have a celebrity, Jay. Oh my God.
He is.
Hey, you guys are the celebrities. I'm honored to be on your show.
We're just the little guys, we promise.
Well, again, folks, we want to thank Joe Zagorski, the author and historian, for sharing all of his knowledge. Make sure you follow, like, and share us on all the platforms you heard at the beginning of the show. And we will be again back next Tuesday for a show. Good night, folks. and go Pack Go.
Go Pack Go.